Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for what is a very important discussion on psychological safety during performance reviews. My name is Jocelyn King, and I'm the CEO of Virgil HR, and I'll be your host for this session. As you know, more than anybody, performance reviews are one of the most pivotal moments in employee experience. They can be a chance to celebrate achievements or align on growth or even set clear expectations. But for many employees, reviews can also be stressful and at times even intimidating. So the fear of being judged, of being misunderstood or unfairly evaluated can cause people to shut down rather than open up. So this is where psychological safety comes in. When employees feel safe, they can share honestly, they can receive feedback constructively, and engage in more meaningful dialogue. When they don't feel this way, reviews risk being one-sided, discouraging, or at times even harmful. So we'll jump straight into our guest, Angela. I'm so thrilled you to be joining us today. Angela is the CHRO of the Chronicle of Philanthropy. She's the ex-CHRO of the Harvard Business Review, a member of CNBC's Workforce Executive Council, and of course, an incredible strategic advisor to Virgil HR. There are many more accolades that go along with your bio, Angela, but we couldn't put everything in the deck, could we? Angela has been working with organizations across industries to build cultures where employees feel empowered to speak up, take risks, and grow, and provides expert insights on performance management and building psychologically safe workplaces that drive real results. Angela, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Jocelyn. You know, I always enjoy riffing with you, so I'm looking forward to this session.
It will be fun. Yes, we've got some good things to cover. Okay, so speaking of things to cover, just to kind of set the tone for what will be a fireside chat today, our conversation is going to be, more of a fireside chat than a lecture. So we're going to talk through some common challenges that managers face, practical ways to make reviews feel supportive rather than threatening, and also how leaders can create a culture of trust that extends beyond the performance review discussion. So at the end of the day, what we really want is for folks to take practical application away from this conversation and apply it to your day-to-day workplace. So as you're listening, I invite you to please send those questions in, send those comments in through the Q&A feature of Zoom. And as you're listening, I'd really invite you to think about your own experiences. What's made a past review feel motivating versus discouraging? Or how did psychological safety or lack thereof it shape the outcome? So feel free to share your thoughts, and we'll be making time to bring your voice into the discussion today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, actually, because I want everybody to have the attention on you here. So let me just pull up my notes, and very excited to get started on this here. Sorry, I'm having here we go. Okay. All right. So, Angela, when you and I chatted about this, we talked about, different stages maybe of the employee journey, the employee experience, and where performance reviews come into play. So from your perspective, from an employee's perspective, actually, what do you think makes a review feel threatening versus supportive?
Whenever a performance conversation comes from out of left field, that's probably the worst moment that an employee can have along their journey with an organization. So what I would like to see organizations do is have this conversation be perennial, be all year round, right? It's one of the reasons actually you said that performance reviews can be one of the most pivotal moments. And I think it's because we give it so much import, so much gravitas that it becomes this really anxiety filled event. Whereas if we break it down into smaller conversations that just happen organically, naturally, frequently, regularly throughout the year, then it really dispels a lot of all this angst that usually accompanies a discussion like this, and that conquers, right, the sense of psychological unsafety. So especially earlier career employees are used to getting feedback of all forms. They're used to getting input and data all the time. They're chasing the likes, the shares, the follows, right? They don't want to have to wait once a year to know whether or not they're liked, to feel supported. They want that all year round. So certainly I think that to the extent that we can make performance management discussions, whatever you call your system, but if we can make that a year round practice, then I think we're all going to be much better off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think continuous feedback is, always a hot topic, but there's a reason for it, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, if companies only waited once a year to get customer feedback, so many of them would fail. Right. So they are constantly checking the temperature of the market to know how they're doing. Are they meeting audience needs? Is there something that can be improved upon? Is there something that they should do less of? And employee experience is no different.
Yeah. How do you think managers can create space for employees to voice concerns or disagreements without fear of backlash?
So that is an ongoing effort, just like we talked about with the performance management discussion or any sort of performance evaluation discussion. Creating that space is something that needs TLC all year round. So from the very first moment an employee joins your organization, the onboarding is a really good signal of whether you're ready, prepared, and excited to have a new joiner come into your organization. So right away, they should know where the bathroom is, right? Bathroom, not physical because it's virtual, but they should have their laptop ready. They should know what the next 30, 60, 90 days looks like. They should know what their goals are. They should know who the important relationships are they should build, right? All of those things signal and telegraph to the employee that they're important and that you're excited about this hire. That sets you off on the right foot so that when things, maybe failures or early mistakes happen, you can do a quick course correction. You shouldn't wait for the mid-year review to tell someone, oh, they really screwed up something that was 6 months ago.
Right, right. And I do think too that if managers create a space where employees feel comfortable not just voicing their concerns or disagreements, but even providing feedback back to the manager as well about potentially ways that they could work better together too. So having that one-to-one dialogue where it isn't just this one-way feedback, there's a loop, and that's how that relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, a relationship works only when there's synergy, only when there's a give and take and back and forth. And if it's only one way, then that harkens back to command and control. And we have moved so far beyond that, right? I mean, organizations are much more now seen as a living and breathing organization where one part gives, another part feeds, and then they switch roles. And that's when you can optimize the performance of an organization, for sure.
Yeah. Well, kind of, a segue to this, and perhaps more to just build on it and apply some steps that people can take. What do you think are some practical steps managers can use before, during, and after a review to foster safety and trust?
The very first thing is to set very clear expectations. What does good look like? I have found that it's actually, I think sometimes we overcomplicate what it means to be a manager. And I have tried to distill it into three simple things. One is to provide support when needed. So you give clarity, you give feedback, you give direction, you give help. Sometimes you jump right in and help. The other thing is to remove obstacles. So is there a policy that doesn't make sense? Is there a team member where there's some conflict that you could use some conflict resolution? Is there an investment that's required? So to remove obstacles. And then the third thing is to get out of the way. So if they're equipped with what they need, they have a clear path to do it. And if you've made the right hire, then all they need is space and agency to go do their job. So
Yeah.
I find if managers can do that, right, then that's a pretty simple recipe for an employee's success. And they can do that all year round. So every time you check in with an employee, what's going really well, what's draining you of energy, and how can I help you be better?
When we talk about how you can help an employee be better, are there ways that managers could deliver constructive criticism without damaging confidence or shutting someone down, especially if they might have a more sensitive personality?
So one of the golden rules of giving feedback is not to make it personal. You make it about the issue. I learned this way back when I was a Zenger Miller facilitator. They had a program called Frontline Leadership, and they had a series of basic principles. And the first one was don't make it personal, make it about the issue. So, Jocelyn, let's say you and I are rolling out a new program and we're having a little difficulty getting on the same page, as opposed to saying, Jocelyn, you're not understanding this. I don't understand why this is so difficult. Take a different tack and say, I'm sorry, I must not be explaining this clearly. Let me try this again. How can I help? How can I help be more clear? What would you like to understand more from me? And so take that pivot, and that automatically lowers everybody's defenses. And then the manager should be open eared as well, right? So equally asking, what can I do better at the end of every interaction really helps to make the employee understand and feel comfortable raising questions, asking tough questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you're able to kind of deflect some of that pressure or negativity and instead turn it into, it almost reminds me of the way that I'd speak to my husband in particular when I want something. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh, this must be, I'm not communicating effectively right now. What can I do
That's
to
right.
help the situation type thing? Yeah, I can see that working.
And that's manager vulnerability, right? We talk a lot about leaders showing up authentically and vulnerably. It's showing up saying, I don't always have all the answers, and I'm also not always going to be right. And it's okay for you to point that out to me. So that's an important ingredient to that relationship. I just wanted to remind folks, right, Jocelyn, that there are hands raised. Just drop, if you have questions, drop them into the Q&A, because we
Thank
can't
you.
always call on you that way.
Thank you. Yes, in the webinar mode, it doesn't allow other people's mics to be on, so just please add your question to the Q&A, or if it's a little separate, you can add it to the chat as well. And actually, you know what? Manager vulnerability is a really interesting topic that I'd love to dig into a little bit with you, right? Because
Sure.
that is such a great way of instilling psychological safety amongst your team, is when they feel like, as a manager, you're right there with them, right? Like you have that same amount of vulnerability they do. All of a sudden, the defenses aren't up. As as an HR professional, what type of advice would you give to other HR professionals on how they can instill that vulnerability with managers across the organization?
There's a number of ways. I mean, the first one has to be role modeling. You can't expect other managers, leaders, to showcase those skills if you're not practicing them yourself. So, one is make sure that you're very good at it. Two is that when you do fumble and make a mistake, be prepared to say, you know what, I screwed that up, and own it. A mea culpa can be a very, very powerful tool in a manager toolbox, just to say, you know what, that was on me. And I'm sorry. And I've learned from that. And you can trust that I will do everything in my power not to repeat that mistake. And then thirdly, it's just simply to ask for feedback. What went well for that? What went well for you? What could I do differently? What could I be doing more of? And what could I be doing less of?
Do you have any phrases or approaches that you think could help soften I guess, kind of the natural power imbalance in a review?
Yeah. So after I have a one-on-one with an employee and I've had a chance to deliver any sort of observations or course corrections that I might have, I always end the session with, and what could I be doing more of? What do you
Mhm.
need from me? So that it feels like that person has a chance to sort of close out the conversation. It does give me feedback. Or if it's, no, everything is great, then we all feel great and we can move on to the rest of our day. So I find that to be a really effective closer for any conversation when it comes to performance.
Do you find that 360 reviews generally help with psychological safety, or maybe potentially?
Uh-huh. That's a really good question, Jocelyn. I'm glad that you raised it. So I have pretty strong feelings around 360. I do think that they have value at a place at a time. I never roll out a 360 until the senior most leadership team has done it themselves. A, because I want them to have had the experience. I have been part of leadership teams where there have been members of that who've never done one. So I want them to experience what that's like. B, it's part of the role modeling. Like, hey, we're going to go through this experience first before we put you through it as well. And then third, it just gives the whole system more credibility.
Mhm.
I think that 360s are valuable mostly when they're not anonymous. Although I recognize that a lot of organizations aren't evolved or mature enough yet to do that. So when names are tied to the feedback, people won't often tell the truth. So I have rolled out 360 in some places where it is completely anonymous. And then over time, evolved and morphed that into, let's just be open. We don't have to go through a separate tool to give feedback. Let's just do it openly and honestly and more regularly. But
Mhm.
yes, I think a 360 perspective can be really insightful because we do show up, whether intentionally or not, differently depending on who we're speaking with. So I may show up very differently to my CEO and the board than I do to someone on my team who's maybe 2 or 3 degrees away from me. And I want to
Sure.
know that I'm showing up consistently, that my behaviors align with what my stated values are, and 360s can be a really effective way to get the feedback.
When I think of psychological safety, I can't help but also wonder if bias plays a role in it as well. And so I'm wondering, for you, how does bias show up in performance reviews and what could leaders do to counteract it?
Mm. I remember once I got a piece of feedback. I had hired someone that had worked for me previously, brought her into my new team, and the rest of the team gave me some feedback like, "We know you're really close to her. Maybe don't be so obvious about that."
Mm,
And that was a really good piece of feedback, right? I was unaware that I was showing up with a sense of favoritism toward the other person. I didn't think I was doing that, but clearly they were picking up on some vibes.
mm.
So I worked overtime to combat that, and I took that really to heart. So you have to ask for the feedback, and then you have to be open to the feedback, and then you have to be willing to do something with the feedback. There's really nothing more offensive or disrespectful than to ask for feedback and then throw it away. That's why I hate engagement surveys when there are no action plans tied to them, because people take the time of answering all that questions. They usually take the time to give you the feedback honestly. And then if you don't do anything with it, you've actually taken a step back in the organization. I think employees would rather that you just not go through the performative effort of asking for their feedback and just doing what you're going to do anyway, because they respect and recognize that that's your right to do that, right? They get that the CEO gets to do what they want to do at the end of the day, but a really enlightened leadership team will actually do something with that feedback.
Yeah. Another thing that shouldn't be happening just once a year.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Pulse surveys are really powerful for that reason.
Mm. So, when I wrote this question around bias, I thought in particular about an employee that worked at a company that I was at when I was in HR, and she was convinced that her manager just didn't like her.
Mm.
And so she was always really intimidated going in and having these one-to-one discussions with him, and she didn't really know how to navigate it. Uh, I know what I did as an HR professional, but I would love to hear what you would do in a situation like that if you had an employee coming to you thinking that their manager was biased toward them in some way and it potentially could have been impacting their performance reviews.
Well, I think the first thing I would want to try and diagnose with that employee is what's giving her that impression. I mean, the reality is that managers are not going to like everyone who works for them. But that doesn't mean that they can't respect and value the contributions that they make, right? I'm not going to necessarily want to go out to lunch on my free time with everybody who's on my team. But I'm going to want to go to lunch with them at work because that's part of the ways we collaborate. That's part of the way that work gets done. It's part of the way we build relationships. So managers do need to extend some energy in forging a sense of trust, forging a sense of safety. That doesn't necessarily have to go all the way to I like you, but it does have to come down to I respect you and I value you. Those are two different things. So the first thing is diagnose, why do you think your manager doesn't like you? And then based upon what I know about the manager, try and maybe unpack some of that. It could be that that manager is that way with everybody. Maybe they're just naturally a little stiff. Maybe they're not warm. But if we are seeing a difference in how they behave, then that's probably something that I would take up with the manager,
Mhm.
with the employee's knowledge, so that we can move through that delicately. But eventually, it requires a conversation between the employee and the manager, probably with some HR moderation. It's not the kind of thing that I would expect an employee to be able to solve for on their own, because
Mhm.
as you said, there's a power dynamic, and that could feel very risky for an employee to call their manager out on, hey, I don't think you like me. Because most managers will say, of course I like you, or why do you think that? And that could only exacerbate the situation. So it's
Right.
something we have to move through really delicately in a perfect place where HR can help.
Right. And another scenario that I had thought of was when I was in HR department of one.
Mm,
And so much of what did or did not happen revolved around the CEO's buy-in, of course. It's a smaller company, especially. And so, everybody's working with him on a regular basis. He's that role model. to everyone on a day-to-day. Is a him in this case, and he, you know, maybe at times might cause problems where bias could actually be potentially impacting performance reviews. Now, if we were to step away, rather than managing that manager, how do you manage a CEO in a situation like that?
That comes down to the strength of your relationship with your CEO. Where I have been most successful, I think one of the highest compliments that I was ever given from the CEO was that he considered me his consigliere. I'm a huge fan of The Godfather. So a consigliere is basically the general counsel to the head boss, and he knows where all the bodies are buried, right? And it's someone who can speak the truth, who has the credibility and gravitas to point out the good, the bad, the ugly, and guide the CEO to making really smart decisions. So if you have the strength of that relationship, that's the easiest way. It's a straight line. Say, hey, this is what I observed. If this is the kind of energy you wanted to put out there, that's great. If you would hope for a slightly different result, this is what I would have done differently. And let's plan for the next time you encounter that situation. So if you observe your CEO participating in some sort of bias, hold up that mirror and say, hey, this is what I saw. Is that what you intended? And if not, here are some ways that you can rectify that. First being an apology. The second is let's work on that together and then continue to reflect on other ways where you might be showing up in ways that are less than desirable. If you have a CEO who's unwilling to listen, then you just have to sort of grind through it. You have to develop allies, find other people that the person respects and might take that feedback from. And then ultimately, for me, at the end of the day, if the CEO doesn't take my counsel, then it's time for me to find a new CEO.
Hmm. Mic drop right there.
Yes, it's right. Exactly, right. Because then I'm not adding any value. And I'm probably being just a pain in the butt more than anything to the CEO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's shift a little bit to culture.
Okay.
How do you think organizational culture and review structures either help or hurt psychological safety?
Oh, they go hand in hand, right? I mean, any quote HR program or system is just a reflection of what the organization culture is. So if we don't care that reviews aren't done on time, then that says about the culture that we're not really invested in our human capital. If on the other hand, we spend a lot of time in learning and development and we do skills gap analysis and we understand where people need more support. We understand where they need more training. We understand how they can get promoted, right? That's a signal that the organization cares about your professional development, about investing in you and retention and making sure that we're creating an environment where you can learn, you can challenge, and you can make mistakes. So I am actually right now struggling with how we do performance management in my current organization. And what I would love to do is actually get rid of the whole darn thing. And move to a model where we're just regularly having conversations with our employees about the work. Because that's fundamentally what the performance review is. It's these are your goals. How did you do? Do you have the requisite skills? How can I support you? What are your opportunities? Let's rinse, wash, and repeat and do that all over again. These are the goals. Do you have the skills? How can I help you? What are you challenged with? Let's do that again and do that every week, right? And so you do have to set some sort of cycle for your merit. There are some organizations actually that give merit increases all year long. I find that administratively a little burdensome, harder to financially plan, although it can be done. But I would love to move to a model where increases are given twice a year, so that they're more timely, they're more tied to performance results. And if someone doesn't get an increase, say in January, you give them 6 months to really come up to speed. And then in July, you can give them another one. So again, it gets away from this yearly dog and pony show where everything is laden on this one conversation. But it's just a conversation that you have all year long.
Yeah, and this ties exactly back to what you mentioned earlier about continuous feedback,
Absolutely.
continuous reviews, having a merit increase schedule like that even just coincides so nicely with that.
It does. And so when I was at Harvard Business Publishing, we also did promotions twice a year for the same reason. So if you were presented for promotion and you weren't quite ready, there was a 6-month runway where you could catch yourself up and we would revisit. So in July and December, and everybody knew It also was nice discipline because before I arrived, we were getting requests for promotions all year long. And it was just really hard to do an apples to apples comparison. It was hard to financially plan for that. But now we knew in July and December that there would be cycles of promotions. And it brought a lot of predictability to that whole process, which created more psychological safety because we could have good conversations with people about their prospects for promotion. And it was good rigor because we could plan for it in the budget as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also, you know, it gives this sense of safety, if anything, just because they know that you as the employer, you as the manager or as the HR leader are there to see them be successful, whether it's through a promotion or through a merit increase or anything else. To have a rigor associated to it instead of it being this once a year or yeah, it was supposed to be in January, but we're actually going to do the reviews in March because we don't have time for it right now, you know.
And rigor doesn't mean you have to be beholden to a process either, right? I mean, I don't like having HR processes just because I need to have them, right? I want to do it because it's good for the business, it's good for employees, and it lifts overall productivity of the organization. If it happens to be a particular program, okay, that's fine. But it should always be in service of something bigger than what I want the HR agenda to look like.
Right.
Yeah.
So another question, and this again kind of falls more into systematically how you could really apply psychological safety to reviews is what changes to the review process itself do you think could make it feel less judgmental and maybe more like a development opportunity?
I appreciate your choice of the word less judgmental because I don't know that you can ever get away with it being completely non-judgmental. I mean, the fact of the matter is it is a vehicle through which we give feedback. Because if you're, like I say, if some organizations have completely done away with a formal performance management review process, but they substituted it with other things, right? With regular conversations, with a culture that supports that, with psychological safety. If your organization's not ready for that, don't do that because then what you've done is you've institutionalized conflict avoidance. Right? So if you tell your managers, guess what? You don't have to do any more reviews. Guess what? There's never going to be a lick of bad feedback ever given if you don't have the discipline to find other ways to tell your employees how they're doing. Because people always need to know what the North Star is and whether they're advancing to it or away from it. So I think that to the degree that, you know, our leaders and our managers need better training, they need better education, they need more coaching, that will strengthen the overall system. And I've seen so many HR functions slack on our obligation to make sure that our managers are prepared for that. So the simpler, the better the system, right? I'm not looking for people to write 3 or 4 pages. Because my hope is that you've been having those conversations all year long. So it's really just a summary of what's happened in the last 6 months or the last 12 months. If you have to write 3 pages, you probably have forgotten a whole nother 3 pages of other things that person has did, right? It's almost too late to capture everything they've done if that's the one time a year that you're waiting to do that. So I like, so the systems that we've designed have always started with the self-assessment because I think self-reflection is important and because it also serves as a good reminder for the manager. We did incorporate an element of multi-rater so that we could get peer feedback. And then we made sure that there was a goal section and then a portion for the manager to talk about performance against goals. And then it was always, an overall summary. Sometimes with a rating, sometimes without a rating, depended on the organization. Some did not like the rating. Some preferred just a clear narrative. And again, that really depends on how well your managers write the reviews. I think lots of organizations would still benefit from it being anchored in a rating. And then we made sure we added a calibration process where we brought managers together so that they can compare the ratings to make sure that we were using the same yardstick. I don't want some employees to suffer because they have a particularly harsh grader and other employees to benefit because they have a particularly lenient grader. So we bring them all together to make sure that meets expectations is the same across the board.
Yeah, that part is really critical. And I think it's often missed.
Yes.
It's often missed, and that is a huge miss if you can't get your managers aligned on what those ratings mean.
That's right.
Yeah. These are kind of questions that are a bit more applicable here. So what do you think is something like maybe one practical shift every manager could implement tomorrow to make their reviews more psychologically safe?
If you're not already in the practice of it, make sure that you have one piece of specific feedback for every person on your team. What are they doing really well? Why is it that you valued it? And then give them a kudos for it so that they know what the good behavior is so that they can repeat it. Start with that. Just as simple, just drop a nugget. And who doesn't want to hear that they're kicking ass? So it also gives you a shot of adrenaline to the organization. And if by chance the feedback that you have is developmental, find a way to position that so it doesn't feel personal, so that it's about the action, the event itself. Hey, I saw you in a meeting. There was a moment when there was confusion. And I think there was an opportunity to pivot the conversation. Let's talk about how you could have handled that differently. So make sure that you have specific examples, right? This is all stuff that HR professionals know, but that perhaps some of our managers don't. So one piece of, one thing I would have all managers try for Monday is prepare a piece of specific feedback for every person on your team, and then just make a habit of that.
That's fantastic. So takeaway here, have your managers start practicing that exercise and see if there are any adjustments that they can make. How do you see performance reviews actually evolving in the future? And like, I loved this question for you because you are so progressive, particularly with this topic. So, now, especially with the younger generation coming into the workforce and bringing perhaps new expectations, what do you think that's going to look like?
So one of the things, so we have to, talk about AI because there's no HR conversation without AI. One of the things that's really powerful about some of these tools that do meeting transcriptions is that you can have it record and it will actually give you a summary. So imagine if you had a scheduled one-on-one every week and each one of those meetings was recorded and AI automatically gave you a summary. Then at the end of the year, at the end of 6 months, or at the end of the month, you could have it then summarize those summaries. Then you would have a clear record of all the things that you've talked about, what the person has done well, the things they need to improve upon. It's just such a much easier lift. And you know that it's true because it's grounded in the data and the evidence that hopefully you were using when you had the conversation the first time around. So, what I'd like to see is a move away from formal performance reviews, but there are still so many organizations. I'm continue to be disheartened by organizations that still don't respond to the 21st century needs of our employees. Mandating return to office is a great example, right? They're just not listening to what their people need. So I don't have optimism that we will fully move away from performance management systems, but for those organizations who are courageous enough to do it, there are technologies that will help you have really meaty conversations. They'll even instruct you on tone and on choice of language so that managers who are unsure as to how to deliver a message can get coaching through those tools. So I think there is technology that will make it easier to do, that will make it, that will facilitate it so it's more regular. And hopefully that means that our managers will get more well-versed so that employees will have their needs met.
Yeah, that's an interesting, and it's something that I think most people can probably employ today because, I have an app on my phone. It's called Voice Notes, right? Just very simple, and it will record conversation, and as you say, does that summary. And I could see over time applying that and having this kind of grander version of what somebody's performance discussions have really looked like in a smart way is pretty cool. And another thing that I think could be easily applicable to many organizations today if there was an appetite for it.
We have some questions, Jocelyn, in the Q&A. Do we want to go to any of those?
Sure, we can go ahead and move over to those. Let me go ahead and open this up here. And we'll see. Okay, one of the first questions here, how do you approach a performance issue when it's counseling versus coaching? From a psychological safety perspective, counseling often seems more difficult to bridge.
Oh, that's such an interesting question, because word choice is really important. But what I would challenge us to think about is what's really the difference between counseling and coaching? If everything was I'm reading from context, right, that counseling is more about, hey, something's not going well, so let's counsel you. But if we were to envision every conversation to be about coaching, how would we how would we come to that conversation differently? How would we show up if it was all about coaching? Even if it was a tremendous screw up. I mean, my children are a perfect example of that. They don't want to be counseled. These days, they really want to be coached, but they much prefer coaching, right, than being counseled. And coaching just is talking about so let's use a sports analogy, right? A football team, they watch the tape and they rewatch the tape. They watch it from all different perspectives. They watched it sped up, they watch it slow down, they watch it in forward, they watch it in reverse. They get it from all different angles. They go out, they diagnose what went wrong with the play, and then they go out and they practice that. So if every performance conversation we had was that, let's talk about what happened. Let's hear from different perspectives. How did that person see it? What did your colleagues see? How did you see it? And then what would we do differently the next time? And then when you're walking into a situation that you think might emulate that, let's prepare for that so that you can run the play differently and better. So I think even if we were just shift our mindset away from counseling to coaching, that might even help us adopt a better attitude about it.
Yep, I love that. Next question here. Are there any self-assessments you'd recommend that help leaders reflect on where they fall along the vulnerability spectrum? Which is very interesting.
Really good question. So I see that Chris and made that point. I don't know of any, but what I would say is this sounds like a terrific exercise for ChatGPT. I am building a self-assessment for my leaders to understand where they fall in the vulnerability spectrum. 1 being totally invulnerable, impermeable, 5 being completely open, maybe to a fault. Build 5 questions that will help me assess a manager's vulnerability. That is a perfect use of ChatGPT. Let me know how that goes. I would love to hear how that experiment goes for you.
Yeah, that's really neat. I'd love to hear about it too. So if there's any way to follow up, I'm going to put our emails up at the very end.
Yeah.
Please follow up with us on that. That's neat. Next, a question from Alex. What are the trends you're seeing with annual performance reviews? Are companies moving away from them? Are companies doing them more frequently than annually, etc.?
It's all over the map, right? I mean, you're hearing some organizations getting even more ruthless with their performance reviews, right? Just automatically lopping off the bottom third, being really stingy with their merit increases. And then you have some organizations that are adopting a much more human-centric approach and doing away with them altogether. So I think it continues to run the spectrum. And as I think I said before, it's really a reflection of your organizational culture and your values. If you believe that humans are integral to your organization, meaning they're everything, then you will treat them with more respect than a mechanical exercise that just stack ranks everybody and lops off the bottom third. So I think that the real evolution comes from what does your organizational culture look like? And then building a system that fits that. Because I think, when we see Microsoft and that they're sharing how they're performance managing people out and even how they're paying them, you get a sense for what kind of organization it's like to work for.
Next question here. At our organization, and this is from Amy, at our organization, we've noticed that when we talk about psychological safety, many of our employees seem to interpret it as being more about emotions than professionalism, which can sometimes blur expectations. From your perspective, how can organizations like ours, which is a nonprofit, foster a culture of psychological safety that encourages openness and vulnerability while also maintaining clarity, accountability, and professional standards?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is I don't think your tax status should matter. I've worked for both profit and nonprofit organizations, and psychological safety, what employees want out of psychological safety is exactly the same. It doesn't matter whether they're working for a mission-based organization getting paid at the 50th percentile or they're out for blood, they're VC funded, and they're getting paid gazillions, right? Everybody wants the same thing. They want to feel respected and valued. So, I think it is psychological safety is actually misunderstood. It's not about being able to say anything you want to anyone at any time, right? It's not the wild, wild west. It's a pact that you have between managers and employees that I will provide a space where you can learn, make mistakes, and try again. And my commitment to you is that I will give you the support so that you can give it your first best try, that I will be here when you do fall down, and I'll be here to coach you, not counsel you, when it's time for you to make that second attempt, and that I will be open to feedback. And so It's about the mechanics of the relationship. It's not about the emotions. It's not about us being friends, right? It's not about us liking one another. It's about how do I, as a manager, enable you to do your best job so that you, as an employee, feel like you're adding impact and that you're doing the job that you were hired for, right? It is in many ways a transaction, and psychological safety just gives fertile ground for that transaction to be as productive as possible. We're long past thinking about the workplace being a family, the workplace being a place where I'm going to be forever. It's about this moment in time. How can I do my best very work? And for me as a manager, how do I get the very best work out of the team?
It's interesting. There are a couple people who had some similar questions, so I'm going to combine them if I can. And it has to do with manager accountability. So, what's the most effective way of holding managers accountable to having constant and honest performance conversations?
Mhm. Well, ironically, it's performance management, right? So if
Mhm.
their managers need to hold them accountable, it's part of their responsibility as a people leader, right? If you have responsibility for a team, then you are responsible for coaching them and giving them support and giving them feedback, and in some cases, giving them a formal review. Their failure to do that means they should get dinged on their own review. I have been in places where I've withheld the manager increase until they've completed all their reviews. So sometimes it's a very stiff carrot. That's a for me a pretty significant failing on the part of a manager if they're not giving the employees the feedback they need to succeed. And I will check, right? I mean, that is also the value of 360s. I will check with employees to see how well they're being supported. How did the reviews go? I mean, that's stuff that comes out in pulse surveys, it comes out in engagement surveys, it comes in listening tours, it comes in skip levels. There's lots of ways for us to get data on how well the manager is executing on that very important responsibility.
Yeah. And I'll note too, because somebody mentioned something else in one of their questions was about managers having individual contributor responsibilities and managerial responsibilities. And I see this happen all the time where they'll put all of their effort into the IC work and the manager stuff is just kind of, oh, this is just a pain for me. I don't have time for this right now.
Yeah.
But as you said, that is one of your core responsibilities as a manager. You are literally managing people in the
That's right.
title.
It's in your title, right?
Right. And so the question here too is, how can we get them to have these continuous conversations? And well, I agree with you that managing performance is really where it's going to be, is working with their managers on setting expectations with them. And if it means to, okay, let's say that you are spending 150% of your time at work right now. We don't want that for you. So where can we align so that you can still handle your managerial work? And if you can't, then maybe you shouldn't be a manager.
And it starts with the leadership team. It starts with the executive team. If they're sloughing off the reviews, if they're not getting them done, then you have a much harder time convincing the rest of the organization that it's something that the rest of your managers need to be doing.
Yeah. I really loved this question. Is there a difference in the way psychological safety is implemented in remote or hybrid teams?
Hmm. Well, I think it's fair to say that for teams that are in person together, it's quicker, it's faster, it's easier, right? We know that in-person interactions lead to more spontaneous conversations that may or may not be work related. They accelerate the building of trust. It does mean for me that you have to be much more clear around what are the behavioral expectations, what is the values orientation of the organization, and then making sure that the people who are your managers know how to manage a remote workforce, because it is different than managing in person, right? It's harder. It requires more intention. It requires reaching out and checking in on someone. So if I don't have a meeting with you, Jocelyn, all week, I make sure that I'll just drop a Slack and be like, hey, happy Monday. Let me know if you need anything, right? Like that requires intention. It took me all of 10 seconds to do that, but it required it to be top of mind for me to do that. So psychological safety in a fully remote organization absolutely can be accomplished, right? So the leadership has to be really clear on this is what we're here to do. These are the goals. This is what good looks like. And then your managers are equipped to give you the support to remove obstacles and get out of your way, right? I mean, you'll hear me say that mantra because I think sometimes we over engineer what it means to be a people leader. But if we can perfect those three things, we're pretty well on our way.
Yep. We only have time for a couple more questions, but one that I also thought was interesting just because I can hear some manager, some leaders saying this. And that was, are we confusing being polite with being psychologically safe?
Yes, yes, absolutely. That is definitely one of the most common misunderstandings of psychological safety. It doesn't mean that, you have to be, yeah, it's not about politeness. And in fact, organizations suffer from the tyranny of politeness, right? I withhold my constructive feedback because I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't want to offend you. You're actually doing me harm by not clearing the air with me, by not being open and transparent with me. So psychological safety has a corollary, which is employees and employees writ large. So people leaders, the executive and the CEO also have to have the courage to have those difficult conversations. So I liken it to if you're learning to ride a horse. The horse knows you're a new rider, so it's going to go slow. It's not going to take off on a full run, and it's going to be probably an older horse, right? Something that's gentler, right? So it's creating a psychologically safe environment for you to get on the horse. But it requires the rider to get on the horse, right? So all the kind and polite horses in the world aren't going to move you forward if you don't get on the dang horse. So equally, right, employees and leaders also have to be able to be willing to have those conversations. And sometimes they're going to be difficult to have. Sometimes they are going to feel personal, but it's not about being polite. It's about doing the right thing. It's also not about being, rude and disrespectful. But yes, it's definitely not about being polite.
Mhm. Another question here, why is psychological safety a better predictor of team performance than individual talent?
Um, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure that they're mutually, I'm not sure that on their own, each of them can't be their own predictor of success. But the reason why I think having psychological safety is more powerful than having a team of A players is um, you can run into problems when you have a team full of egos, where everybody thinks they have the right answer and it's the only right answer. Psychological safety is about having a team who is willing to put their ego down a notch for the benefit of the larger team. So even though they think they might have the right answer, they have a willingness to hear others out, to entertain and consider that maybe there is a different approach, that maybe together we can be better. So while it's wonderful to have a team of all A players, and you probably will be successful, I would probably take a team that was committed, psychologically safe, and willing to collaborate, because I think that just makes for much better teamwork. And we know that strong teams outperform a team of strong individuals.
Okay, last question for you, and this is a big one.
Okay.
What advice would you give to an HR specialist who's new to an organization and tasked with reintroducing a performance review process that hasn't been done in a while?
The first thing I would do is go on a listening tour and understand why it didn't work, what went wrong, and I'd tap into employees and see what would you like to see in a performance management system to help you really understand the culture of your organization, the values of the organization, so that you can build something that feels organic to the company that you've just joined. Now, that's not saying that you need to build it and exact the model, because you want to maybe move the culture along. Maybe it needs to change and shift and improve. But you don't want to come and try, especially as someone new, you don't want to try and insert something that's completely foreign, because you will get organ tissue rejection, right?
Mhm.
People won't embrace it. And then you want to make sure that you get leadership buy-in to whatever model is you're trying to introduce. Because without their sponsorship, without their support, it will be very, very difficult for you to implement any system. Good luck with that. But feel free to reach out for Jocelyn or I offline. We'd be happy to support you further in that endeavor.
All right, thank you so much, Angela. I'm just going to go ahead and put this last slide up here for everybody. You have access to our emails. Please feel free to reach out with any questions. If you are not using Virgil today and you're interested in learning more about our employment and labor law tool, feel free to book a demo here. The SHRM activity code for those of you seeking PDCs is here below. And I really hope that this was, and I'm sure it was with Angela here because you're amazing. I really hope this was an informative discussion about psychological safety in the workplace, maybe provided some additional education that you hadn't heard of or maybe hadn't thought of before. and hopefully took some practical tips away that you could then apply to your organization. As part of the recording that's going to be going out, we are also going to be sending a psychological safety toolkit as well. And it's a pretty comprehensive toolkit that gives kind of the step-by-step on everything you'd need to do if you were trying to implement psychological safety into your performance reviews for the first time, or maybe improve what currently exists today. So we hope that's helpful for you. Again, thank you for all the hearts. I appreciate it. And thank you very much for your time. And Angela, as always, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. And if anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm the only Angela Chang Semeny out there, and just let me know that you attended this fireside chat with Jocelyn, and I'd be happy to accept the invitation.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.
Bye.